Hello, everyone. My name is Alexis Kinlan, and I'm an agricultural reporter and novelist, and I'll be hosting today's webinar. The School of Public Policy is Canada's leading policy school, known for our practical research and for bringing people together to discuss the many important issues with experts, which is what we are here to do today. Thank you all for joining us. If you have to leave early, recordings of the webinar are posted on the School of Public Policy website, and you'll receive a link in the follow-up email. Today's topic is Canada's beef sector, essential and sustainable, looking forward. Our speakers are Bob Lowe, the president of the Canadian Cattlemen's Association, Jill Harvey, Alberta Agriculture Industry Advisory Committee co-chair, oh, that's a mouthful, and owner-operator of Harvey Ranching, and Nicole Neubauer, Alberta Agriculture Industry Advisory Committee co-chair and owner-operator of Neubauer Farms. We're going to do some moderated questions, but you'll also be able to ask some questions of our panelists. So please type your questions in the Q&A box below, and we will pose them to our speakers after the discussion. So today it's a little different if you've attended any of the other previous sessions. Today is a panel, so I'm going to give you a little context before we get into the Q&A with our panel guests today. In a major report in 2017, the federal government pinpointed the agriculture industry as a big driver for global growth potential. It is one of Canada's strengths. Agriculture is a large contributor to Canada's GDP, has above average growth rates, and sees big global demand growth with big population growth and income increases in Southeast Asia, China, and India, for example. So now fast forward to 2020. In March, all agriculture and agri-food businesses were declared essential services. The sector is now being asked to deliver more than ever before. As we look at ways to help pull Canada out of the COVID-19 economic slump and into economic recovery, agriculture and agri-food is there to help. But it is never simple. Canada has climate change goals and needs to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions while growing the economy. Our beef industry is an example of successful integration of these diverse goals. And today we are going to explore the goal of sustainability and how it is central to Canada's beef industry and its positive path forward. So here, now I'm going to give you some statistics to get us grounded. Beef exports have increased over 500% since 1980. China is a big part of that, becoming one of the largest consumers of beef in the world and increasing its per person consumption by 22% in just 3 years. Canada is a big exporter, and we currently export 40% of our beef production. Canada's beef industry carbon footprint is 11 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per live weight at farm gate, which is less than half the world's average. Canada's beef industry growth potential lies in fulfilling a big global market need. What are the sustainability and climate change implications of Canada continuing to expand its global market export of Canadian beef? This webinar will visit with experts in the livestock sector to discuss its place as a major part of the growth and recovery for the Canadian economy. How can beef be both essential and sustainable? I'd like to welcome Jill, Bob, and Nicole, and then I'm going to ask the first question to all of them. Hi, Bob. Hi, Jill. Hi, Nicole. Hi. So the first question is, how does Canada and the world define sustainability within the beef industry? What are the parameters we measure, and how does Canada measure up?
I'll lead off on that one, Alexis. Globally, sustainable beef is defined as socially responsible, environmentally sound, and economically viable product that prioritizes people, planet, animals, and progress. There are 5 principles of sustainable beef or areas that we focus on: natural resources, people and community, animal health and welfare, food, food, efficiency, and innovation. The Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef measures and tracks sustainability performance in the Canadian beef industry against 15 key performance indicators, social, environmental, and economic, along with more than 26 additional supporting indicators. Our performance is outstanding. We know that we have one of the lowest greenhouse gas footprints in the world, and we've been able to reduce our greenhouse gas footprint by 15% over the past 30 years. We conserve 44 million acres of grasslands and 1.5 billion tons of carbon. Animal care with the Beef Code of Practice is world leading. At the same time, we're also committed to continuous improvement. So we have a sustainability strategy that identifies 10 key goals we want to bring stakeholders together to achieve.
Nicole, did you want to go next? Or did you want me to go?
I'm frozen. So as long as
You're good now.
Okay, of
You're
course
good
I've
now.
got to. Okay, Jill, why don't you go ahead and I'll just do a test here on my internet and make sure I'm good.
That sounds great. Well, thanks for having me today. And from a producer's perspective, I really wanted to shed some light on the experience that I've personally had with becoming a verified sustainable cattle operation. And so many years ago, the Canadian cattle industry were very forward thinking and saying, we need to be able to measure what we're doing, but also find a way to be able to connect with our consumers via a label. And that is really where they needed the buy-in from producers like myself and the support to have quality information in order to have a verified sustainable label. And so with the pilot that took place a few years ago with the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, and McDonald's was a big player in that, it was really a good exercise in seeing that programs that we had in existence, such as verified beef production, were able to comply with that sustainability model. And so there was the addition of a couple other modules, and verified beef production became verified beef production plus, with the addition of the environment and animal care aspects. So the experience that my husband and I had when the auditors came to look at our operation, you know, it wasn't just about checking boxes. It really was about showcasing what we felt was sustainable on our operations. And I think what was really important is that we weren't put into a box, like you need to be like this. It truly was recognizing our individuality, and we were proud to take part, knowing that we were a purebred operation. We're not like everybody else. We're different from the operation down the road, the county next door, the next province, or across the country. But it doesn't mean that one practice is better than the other. Whether we use horses on our operation and we have quads and so on, and other operations use dogs and quads solely. There really wasn't that kind of pitting against, you know, you should do things a certain way. It was more like, what do you have, and what does that look like to you in terms of your individual farm? We all have different soil types. Mother Nature could treat my neighbor a little bit better than me. I might miss a rain shower, and that really has an impact on how many cattle I can graze in a certain parcel of land. So all of those things were taken into consideration. What I think was most valuable to me as a purebred breeder were, you know, genetics excellence is what we strive to do, was that when the auditor came and sat at our kitchen table and looked at our environmental farm plans, what we're using for fertilizer, making sure that we didn't have leaching or any of that, looking at our planning and on our crop planning, our breeding program, they asked a series of questions about how we felt we were sustainable. And it really led to the genetic side of things. where they were recognizing that the work we've done in artificial insemination over the years and embryo transplant really was a way that we could accelerate production of high quality traits in cattle, and then effectively in our annual bull sell those high quality bulls to people like Nicole, for instance, or Bob, to use in their cattle herds or commercial cattle herds. So they really recognize the purebred breeder, and I like that, the fact that that was a part of the assessment. That's how detailed it was. And then to add to that, they also recognize the work that we do with our veterinarian through our herd track system, what the expected progeny difference EPDs, the data system that we use with our breed associations to give us and give our clients the best number system to be able to predict things like calving ease, growth, which are all, those are just examples. There's a whole gamut of EPDs, but that gives other producers a tool to be able to say, you know, I want to have less days to having my cattle finish, and so I want to use these types of genetics. So that to me was huge. We've also introduced DNA to our EPDs, which just enhances the predictability. So genetic markers for tenderness, all of those things combined were all part of the checklist. Finally, another area, there were many areas that we went through. We drove around with the auditor, but land is where it all starts. And for myself and my husband, I just saw the pride that it brought out in my husband to show them some of the riparian area projects that we've been working on, such as solar watering systems and having more fenced areas so that we can have more balance when it comes to the wildlife on our farm, plus the rotational grazing, some of the cell grazing techniques that so many people across this country have adopted. And I think even with this, the verification and certified sustainable ranches, you're just seeing so much more of it, which is really, really why we've come along. So I guess to wrap up my perspective on it is that animal care, the treatment of our employees, how we train our employees, how we work with them, how we work with our family, and the economic realities of ranching, all of that was considered. And that is so important because all of it is a part of sustainability. If our business is not viable economically, then all the other parts don't fit in and they all fall to the side. So to me, you know, we've really been able to rise to the occasion when it comes to being a verified sustainable operation.
So it's really a holistic look at sustainability as well.
No doubt. And so, Nicole, perhaps you have some additional considerations when it comes to being a commercial cattle person in Alberta.
Thank you, Jill, and I will try to just parallel some great points that you made. First off, I just want to thank you for this opportunity to participate in this webinar today. I feel really honored to sit alongside Bob and Jill. I deeply admire their tireless commitment to improving our industry. For years and years, they've been a really integral part of that. And while their expertise runs very deep on global levels and big picture levels, I thought it'd be best today for me to present basically the practices on our operation. So how that transfers over to a commercial cow-calf operation and what that looks like. So for our family, sustainability has a definition that has been 110 years in the making. It's been an evolution. So our farm was originally settled in 1910, and when Philip and Caroline Neubauer took over their preemption, practices looked a lot different back then. At that point in time for their family, sustainability meant not dying. I mean, it was markedly different back then. and so to me, sustainability on our farm has changed dramatically over the years. And I kind of believe there's so much value in knowing where you started to appreciate how far you've come. So sustainability to us is a pathway. There isn't really a beginning point or an end point. It's more of an evolution towards excellence. And decisions that we make are grounded in environmental stewardship practices. So our end game, our big picture is that we will leave our land in better condition than it was received. And that just copies what's happened over the generations. So our kids are 5th generation farmers. If they choose to take over the farm, our end goal is that it will be a healthy, thriving enterprise. And that's where sustainability fits in with our family succession plan. So the health and well-being of our soil and our grass and our water supply, well, those are top priorities because we cannot continue to farm unless we are taking all of those factors into consideration. So we raise food in a socially responsible manner. That's evidenced by the fact that we have detailed records. Even though we have a commercial cattle herd, we have detailed records on every single member of our herd, and I can trace back where they came from, if they've ever had any kinds of illness and intervention required, coupled with the fact, the results. So what were their calves like at birth? What were their calves like at sale date? How did they measure up, basically? Because we're always considering who is good contributing members of our herd, because it takes a significant amount of resources to grow that calf. And so we have excellent working relationships with our veterinarians because we believe that herd health is our top priority. So we place incredible value on learning and staying up with the changes, because the money and the effort that has been invested in research has allowed us as producers to be much more efficient and ultimately to have a really healthy herd. Also, as a sideline, we believe that it is our social responsibility to offer transparency to our customer. And so keeping in mind that there are consumers of our product, and our end game is keeping them happy. So this belief launched an agriculture education program back in 2005. We reached out to our community and through collaborative effort with educators created a program where children can come to our farm and they can gain a greater appreciation of where their food comes from and ask questions. We encourage questions, and some of them can be quite challenging, but we don't resist the opportunity for that open dialogue. And we can speak from a really well-versed frame of reference because we're just talking about what we do on our farm. And that story, that piece is really vital. So basically that social piece is very important. We've got the environmental piece safeguarded in decisions that we make related to stewardship. And then our aim really is to remain financially viable, because agriculture is a business. It's a great lifestyle, which it's often highlighted as such, and we've raised our children as partners in our business. And so we need to remain financially viable. But we also need to strike a balance between doing the right thing at the right time and what that cost entails. So for us, as far as our cattle herd goes, we believe that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So in parallel with the hard work of purebred beef producers like the Harveys, we make investments. We invest wisely in good replacement quality heifers, quality herd bulls that have the science that backs the fact that we are going to have the most efficiently created protein product at the end of the day. We use quality feed. We process our feed. So that feed is already partially digested for the cow before she even eats it. So it eliminates some of the energy that's going to be required to break that down and to convert that into usable protein and energy. Mineral, we use a mineral specific to our cows at calving time that ups the antibodies within their milk. So we're addressing that issue of passive transfer for our calves when they're born. They get that colostrum. It's very nutrient rich, and the immune system, immunity is started and activated, so we don't have calves that are trying really hard not to die for the first few days of birth. Instead, they hit the ground running, and we see those gains they multiply over time. We believe that all of these, which come disguised as expenses, are in fact investments. So over time, each of these investments have paid dividends. And really that's evidence for us in the sale ring, and also our very low death loss records. And again, the prevention for us on our farm is the fact that we hardly even use antibiotics. We don't have sick cattle because we're preventing the illness with best management practices up front. So I believe that in terms of sustainability and how Canada measures up, we are well poised and already are a global leader to fill that beef protein requirement, because we offer a quality product that quite simply checks all the boxes.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, everybody. So I just remind anyone else, if they have any questions, you can type them in the Q&A box down below. So I'm going to go move into my next question. How does Canada's beef industry impact greenhouse gas emissions for Canada? And how have, production practices changed over the years to consider this?
Okay, thanks, Alexis. I'll lead off again with the science, and then we'll have the interesting conversations following me. Canada's beef industry accounts for 2.4% of our overall emissions from all sources. 2.4% of greenhouse gases. Transportation accounts for 28%, just to put it in perspective. We've been able to reduce greenhouse gases per kilogram of beef by 15% over the past 30 years through improved animal productivity and improved animal efficiency and improved reproductive performance. Point being, if we can get animals to slaughter sooner, they have fewer days to produce greenhouse gases. If they're bigger, then more beef per carcass and the need for fewer carcasses. We currently have a goal to reduce our greenhouse gas footprint at the CRSB. On top of research investments to further improve productivity and efficiency of cattle, forage and feed crops, and the Beef Cattle Research Council has also increased its investment in strictly environmental research from 2% in 2013 to 15% in 2020 to help us better understand the impacts and benefits of beef production in Canada's environment. When we started, and Jill mentioned the CRSB and going through the pilot projects and stuff, and we did a sustainability, we wanted to find out where we were in the industry at that time. We knew we were good. We wanted to find out how good, but we also accepted the fact as industry that there's going to be places where we need to improve, and research into environmental aspects was one of those places. So we've designed our research dollars into improving where that assessment showed that we needed improvement in. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jill or Nicole.
Go ahead, Jill.
Okay, I'll go ahead. Well put, Bob. And I think that my philosophy on it, and many other people, is you can't track what you don't measure. And so now that we've been doing that for quite a few years and looking at additional research, what has really come to light is the amount of carbon that can be stored in tame or native grasslands. And for those of you who are really interested in knowing a little bit more about that, native grasslands can store a very large amount of carbon, and many universities are putting a lot of time in looking at how we can measure that, but also enhance it as time goes on. And one of the tools to enhance the preservation of native grasslands is having a large grazer, and that's cattle in Western Canada. And so the Guardians of the Grassland, a short documentary, came out just a few months ago. And if you go to guardiansofthegrasslands.com, you can see the trailer and you can request for a screening. Now this short documentary has now become, has won a lot of awards because it's brought to light the importance of preserving Canada's only endangered ecosystem that is really a place to call home for 60 endangered species in Canada, and so much wildlife that if we continue to lose it to whether it be cultivation or cities growing or urban sprawl, we can't ever get that back. And so when you look at it from purely a carbon capture scenario, it makes so much sense to preserve it. But then there's all the benefits for us nature lovers to keep those native grasslands intact. And so, quite honestly, I learned so much about native grasslands I didn't know very much about. I'm originally from Ontario, and I've always been around tame grasses. And on our farm near Olds, we only have tame grasses. Now, I do know that keeping my soil healthy and prolonging the years of keeping it without having any till is really advantageous. Someday, I'd love for the research or be able to have my exact numbers of how much carbon storage we have on our operation. But I think by looking at all of the other tools of what we do here allows me to give me a pretty good idea of what my offset is. And I think that's a measurement that really needs more exploration, and it's a huge advantage to Alberta as we look at our economic recovery. Is where we sit in terms of our environmental footprint and how effective we are at raising cattle.
One thing I'd like to add to that, Jill, is just because I was learning about it, is also like there's it's not just the beef producers who are concerned about the native grassland. It's conservation groups like Ducks Unlimited, Nature Conservancy of Canada, Birds Canada, and all these groups have recently wrote a letter to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change and the Minister of Agriculture, speaking out in behalf of the beef industry and support for the beef industry. Just in light of COVID-19, and they've just written about how important the beef industry is to maintaining that habitat, and how we want to keep beef producers on the land. So yeah, it's just something to add to that our audience might not know. So yeah, Nicole, I'm interested to hear from you now.
This is just great dialogue, and it's so super to find, to have different perspectives. I'm really interested in that whole piece about the grasslands, because on our farm, we farm in the southeast corner of Alberta. It's very arid. We have a very arid climate, and we do have native prairie range that's been the same way for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And our grass exists in such a delicate balance that as environmental stewards, I view myself as a caretaker of that grassland, and the cattle I use as a grazing tool to maintain the health and viability of that grass. The grass was designed to be grazed. When we think back through history, we had huge buffalo herds that came through and would graze that grass. And that activity would stimulate additional production. It would aerate the land, and they would consume a bunch of the waste material. Some of the other side benefits of grazing is reduction in the fire hazard. And it also is beneficial for the microbes because it's the way nature was designed. It's the way nature was intended. So at this point in time, we don't have that keystone grazer in the buffalo, but we can replace them with cattle. And with cattle, we can actually do a far better job because we have the science to rely on to understand how we best manage the resource. So of course, as a producer, greenhouse gas emissions and all of the pieces that fit to the environmental stewardship puzzle are top of mind for me, because a healthy environment is healthy to my bottom line, and ultimately that's where sustainability exists. So I think it's really important when we think about how practices have changed over the years. We need to see that the targeted and intentional research that's been put into an application that's been put into reducing emissions has been a real benefactor for the cattle industry. So research shows, and Bob touched on this, that over time, Canada actually requires fewer cattle that utilize fewer inputs to get to a harvest size. And so that is a huge piece to the puzzle in terms of efficiency. The less time they're on the planet, the offsetting environmental rewards are heightened. So I can use a real life example of how practices on our farm that changed over time netted some great results. So when we took over our family farm, we took over an existing herd, and the previous generation, that herd was managed in their wisdom and with the science and technology at the time. And we were very critical of that herd because ultimately we wanted to make sure that all the boxes were checked. And after doing an assessment, we looked through them. There was poor feet, there was bad udders, there was high percentages of dry cows, which cows that did not come back bred. There were heavy birth weights. Lots of calves came out of the side or needed intervention, but relatively, in comparison, lower birth weights. There was some high death loss. So when I say the birth weights, I'm basing it on 240 days, weaning weight at the sales ring, 500-pound heifers, 525-pound steers. So that was some of the information that we had. And really the herd wasn't in as good a condition as they should have been in, given the nutrient load that they had been provided. So we decided that herd should be liquidated, and we went on to rebuilding the herd according to some very specific guidelines that we wanted. So the original herd was just one breed. It was still a commercial herd, but it was one pure breed. And instead we hybridized the breed with a cross. So we took Hereford cows with Black Angus bulls, they crossed, and we took those heifer calves. So what happened for us is that hybridized cross, we got some really desirable traits from each breed. So those heifers became great producers. They had a great temperament. They had great milk production. Those were some attributes we believe came from the Hereford piece. And then the blacks offered some longevity, some black pigmentation around the eyes and on their bag. The sun can be really hard on those mums if they have a light bag. Good feet and fight in calves, which is really favorable traits that we thought came from the Angus. So as a result, our operation now, we have easy keepers, great mothers, easy calvers, a great way to gain. Making those changes, harnessing the power of the science that was available to us, our weaning weights at 240 days are now 600-pound heifers, 650 weight steers, averaged over the last 4 years. So we have that economical benefit to say that it's working. So the big picture, the high level picture, what does it mean for operation? We are in the business of growing beef. And the sooner that we can get a carcass to harvest weight, the smaller the environmental impact and the greater economic benefit in terms of price per kilogram to produce. So all of these factors combined are really what create a high quality, really sustainably raised beef product that comes from this great province of Alberta.
And the third question now, thanks everybody for your answers. Does it make sense for Canada to help meet the growing global market demand for beef and other meat products, comparing its relatively high related greenhouse gas emissions?
Alexis, before I get into answering this, you brought up a really good point about the environmental groups collaborating with the cattlemen. And when we started that process, we realized that as cattlemen, we couldn't do this by ourselves. We needed help. When you talk to anybody, really, you find out, when you get talking to them, you find out that there's more in common than there's not in common. So you talk about that stuff. And, farmers are the ultimate environmentalists. It seems to a lot of people kind of odd that we would, as cattle people, align with environmental groups, but 80% of what we talk about is common ground. So it's a really good fit. To get on with your question, to meet the global market demand for beef, we are a leader in sustainable beef production. Again, like I said, with one of the lowest carbon footprints, our greenhouse gas emissions, and a commitment to keep reducing this. I also sit on the board of the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, and we are recognized in Canada around the world for leading sustainable beef production. we have to understand that when we talk about sustainable food systems, we need to take into account metrics beyond just greenhouse gases. For example, beef producers, well, when we talk about collaboration with environmental groups, but producers conserve 44 million acres of grasslands that cover habitat for over 1,000 animal, plant, and insect species. If it weren't for cattle, a lot of those grasslands would be grain farms.
Mm-hmm.
I believe the number is 33% of arable land in Canada is used for beef production, but that encompasses 68% of the biodiversity.
Mm-hmm.
75 to 80% of the species at risk in Alberta are found in grassland ecosystems, and most of that is managed by producers. So just a little bit of the facts, and then turn it back over to Jill and Nicole.
That's great, Bob. There's a lot of different ways you could go about answering those questions, so I might jump around a little bit. But firstly, when I look at the most logical way to look at GHGs, you know, they're one measurement. And when you look at it from a global perspective, growing the right food in the place most suitable for growing that food is really, really important. I believe that there is an advantage to growing beef cattle in Canada. We talked about the grasslands. We've talked about the kind of people that we have here, our education system, the programs, the verification, the continuous improvement. We have the beef cattle, we've got BCRC, the Beef Cattle Research Council, that's continuously engaging with our producers to make us all better, and to look at those efficiencies in how we can continuously improve. The same with CRSB, and there are a lot of other programs out there. And even though there's differences within all of the provinces and how you raise cattle, I think it's really important that if you're using, there needs to be a recognition of the tools that are used to raise cattle and have a positive outcome. And so even though in Ontario, early in the spring, I couldn't have cattle out to pasture as early because they would puncture the ground. There's just too much humidity, and the soil was very different than it is here. I would say it's easier to raise larger numbers of cattle in Alberta. On our ranch, we have vast amounts of land, and it dries out a lot quicker. In Ontario, we'd have to make sure that we had enough, a cement pad, and had some barns and so on, but we made it work. And you just had your practices were just different. And so I think that that's really important, that just because practices are different across the country or from one country to another doesn't mean they're wrong. However, there is advantages. There's a reason why there's feedlots in southern Alberta, because it's a great place, a great climate to raise cattle. They thrive. They do very well there. My cattle here, we have certain breeds that we've brought to Canada many years ago, some of them before my time, but over time they just kind of weeded out. They didn't do well in Canada's climate, but they do very well maybe in southern states or in Mexico and South Africa and so on. And so I think the ability for producers like Nicole, for example, to look at which breeds really cross well for her and were the ultimate hybrid cross, or producers like myself who have Charolais and Hereford cattle. I know the attributes of both breeds. We track, we measure, we produce what we feel is contributing to having the most efficient cattle possible. And not only that, we do export our genetics globally. So a big part of our business here at Harvey Ranching is exporting to Europe, the United States, Mexico, New Zealand, and Australia. Now, some people many years ago would say, oh, well, but if we're sharing our good genetics with other countries, is that a bad thing? I don't think that's a bad thing at all. The practices and the climate and the environment that those other cattle are raised in those other countries are very different. So I've seen varied results, and I've traveled to many of these countries. But what I know is that there's benefit from doing that, because there's trade between our various countries, and it helps us and it helps them. When I look at the kind of cattle that we have here in Canada and the producers that are really rising to the occasion, then I'm really proud to say that we are sought after as one of the best genetic hubs to buy from globally. And that's just something to be really, really proud of. And it's something we have to continuously work towards. We have to remain competitive in that. And yeah, I'm just proud to be a part of that. One of the challenges, though, I would say when it comes to, and this is a bit different, but when I'm looking at my farming operation and in my area, when it comes to GHGs and competitiveness with other, I guess with other segments of agriculture, this is where it gets really, really tricky. So when I pay $800,000 for a quarter of land, for example, at times, many would say you'd be a crazy person not to plant a crop there and run cattle, because the economic realities of growing a crop are that you're going to be able to pay down that loan every year, most likely, and have insurance on that and so on. And it just pencils. Cattle don't always pencil. Now, it all depends on the kind of land that you buy, because some land is too hilly, too rocky to really to have a crop on. So of course it's beautiful for cattle, and it's the most effective way to produce beef, to produce a product. But when it comes to competing for land and the land cost, that makes it really, really difficult to not break up more land. And we know that there needs to be a balance there. And so I think that that's one of the challenges that we're going to see ahead. Policies need to be favorable as we move forward. We want to make sure that Alberta and Canada remain competitive and grow our cattle numbers. We know we can do it. We can do it well and efficiently. And how can we have more value added businesses, components to keeping that supply chain, part of the supply chain in Canada, and then doing more exporting, and then having some more of that local presence as well. I think that there's a bit of a need or a want to do more of that as we look at the economic recovery. So I would say we have a great product. We have to look at the competitiveness and make sure that we keep our young producers wanting to raise cattle. And there's a few different ways to do that. It has to be profitable, and there has to be a value chain that's tied to it, and have an economic presence in the recovery of our province and our country.
Wow, excellent, Jill. That just really captures and summarizes so the big picture of what's going on and the potential that agriculture has. We hear it a lot in economic recovery, and talks about where can we look to, what can we find, what industry can support and assist us as we rebuild. And agriculture is currently in that dialogue. And I think that we need to look at how agriculture can actually help renew the Alberta advantage. And a really wise man once told me that all wealth originates in the ground. And when we think about our ability to leverage our carbon capture advantage with the fact that we can use our grasslands, which are maintained by our cattle herds, to create a value for what that carbon store looks like, is going to become a huge player on the stage moving forward. So as far as Canada being poised to be a leader in supplying a demand for beef, absolutely on a global level, producers across our province are improving their technology and their research and development into how we actually raise beef. But it actually comes with a parallel advantage that is something that there needs to be more research and more effort devoted to, because we need to further substantiate the claims of grassland carbon sequestration and how the practice of grazing beef cattle places Canada in such a unique, amazing position, because there's a dual benefit, because we're producing an excellent quality, nutrient-dense product that has increased demand the world over as countries are evolving to places where the general population has more financial asset at their disposal. They're wanting to eat high quality food, and beef is there. Zinc, iron, protein. It's a complete package and really a superfood in my opinion. So the dual benefit is that we produce this great product that's raised in an ethical, sustainable manner. And then also in parallel, we're generating a nature-based solution to fight against climate change. So in the ultimate win-win, in my view of what the benefit is to cattle grazing our grasslands and the production of beef cattle, it's huge. It's almost immeasurable. And just as a side on our farm, our pasture land, it's all rolling hills. We have a mixed farm. So the available acres that can be broke and put into crop production, every available acre is already designated for that. And that's because from a financial point of view, we can make more money per acre growing wheat and lentils and barley crops than we can grazing it for our cattle. So we have to assign what that value is. What's that missing piece? What is the value of that grassland, and incentivize things so farmers, ranchers are motivated to keep that carbon in the ground and maintain these prairie ecosystems that the grass creates. So we use the land that is not suitable for farming to grow amazing sustainable protein. And if it wasn't for our cattle grazing that grassland, it would become overused or underutilized, and it would produce less in the end. So cattle really, they're a key moving forward, and I think that we need to really consider the valuable role that they play in what we owe to our planet and our children and a sustainable future.
So I do have, thank you, Nicole. So I do have some questions coming in from the audience. The first question is open to whoever wants to answer it if they know the answer. Is there any work underway on a carbon credit system in agriculture in Alberta?
Yes, it's a simple answer. And I'll expand a little bit on what Nicole just said. And she brought up a very good point. All the acres on their farm that can be put into crop production are in crop production because that's financially the best move for them. I'd just like to mention that if we want to save these grasslands, and the beef industry is what's going to do it, the production of beef has to be on a par with the production of canola, or the land will go to its highest value for pure economic reasons. And carbon capture or carbon credits, cap and trade system, some sort of recognition of the carbon that is sequestered by grasslands is a very integral part of this, in my opinion.
Go ahead, Nicole.
I just really agree with what Bob says, and I think as we move forward and we look at the future of research and doing a complete asset appraisal of Alberta and what do we have to offer, we might have something right under our feet that has the incredible ability to be leveraged in amazing ways. We have all kinds of industry, essential industry that we need. People need to drive cars, and cars emit carbon. We can't ask people that live in a rural-based province to stop driving. However, if we can assign a value to the carbon that we're capturing and storing because of our grasslands and because of maintaining and being a caretaker of those grasslands, the essential industry that needs to exist can then purchase those carbon credits so that they can remain in business, so they can remain viable, and it one hand helps. We help each other. It becomes a really a symbiotic relationship between what we need to have, what we have to have in order to do business and thrive in our province, and what we've already got that we have to assign a value to.
I would agree with all the points made, and I guess I was trying to get there also with the competitiveness as a beef rancher to try and compete with purchasing more land or even renting land in our area with crop production. It makes it very difficult. Now, of course, we do have our own crops as well to feed our cattle, but we'd like to have more grazing land. And I have seen areas where there isn't any grazing land and everything has gone into crops. And we need both, but balance is king in this. And that's what's going to help us be viewed as a leader in this space. I guess talk is cheap. We need to get going on something very soon. I know it seems like we've been talking about implementing the carbon credit system for a long time, but it just really needs to get going. I think I've been hearing about it for about 15 years. When I traveled to Australia first, I think it'd probably be 10 years ago. I remember visiting a cattle producer that was telling me we were in a forested area, and he said, yes, I get X amount of money for keeping this forest here. And I thought, wow, that's amazing, because then there was a deer that came through and I saw some beautiful birds in the sky, and I thought, that is really, really critical to keeping nature where it is, and having cattle as a part of that.
So the next question I'm going to ask is, I think I'm going to ask it specifically for Jill, because I think she actually covered it. So it's, do you think we can create more economic incentive for maintaining native grasslands, and how? I can see people tilling up native land every year because cash crops can be more economically viable than native prairie, at least in the short term. Mm-hmm. Isn't economics a key part of sustainability?
Okay, so it's saying my internet's a little unstable. Hopefully it's okay.
Okay, I can still see you. Yeah.
Okay, good. I think we've just covered that in terms of a carbon credit system and having some incentive for keeping those grasslands intact. And that it makes sense for example, an airline company to trade those credits for being able to be more viewed as more environmentally friendly, and knowing that at the other side of it, that we're actually capturing that carbon and measuring that carbon. I know it's not easy to measure carbon, and there's a lot of research underway doing so, but it has come a long way, and those numbers are hitting paper. And I think that that's where we need to come along with some government support and looking at that framework of what we can make work that works for producers. And just as we did with the CRSB, with the verified sustainable pilot, it has to be done so in tandem with industry and with producers for it to work. It's the only way we can get buy-in for it to get off the ground, and it's the only way that we can make it something that will last for a long time. Any other comments from the panelists?
I think you've done a great job of summarizing that, Jill. Thank you.
So I have a question here. Can sustainability lead us to value-added projects in Alberta?
I can touch on that one a little bit, maybe. Definitely, as we look toward our economic rebuild, or our vision for the future, I guess, for Alberta, and certainly a huge piece to creating a more stable economic environment, it involves looking at all of the raw products and the raw goodness that starts out in Alberta, and how can we take those products and refine and add value to them. And in terms of adding that value, it can be from a nutritional standpoint, but it also is a dollars and cents standpoint. We need to refine and develop more of those industries here within our province. And there's always an offsetting cost to doing business with any kind of industry, because it takes energy to create and add value. Because we have the luxury of living in a natural resource from an energy sector based province, which unfortunately is in a weakened economic state right now. But those cheap natural gas prices work really well for making fertilizer, for example. But in the process of making fertilizer, CO2 is a byproduct. And while they capture a lot of that CO2, they turn it into a product that can go into the greenhouse industry, because we know that plants require CO2 as part of their process. In making fertilizer to feed people, we do have some CO2 that is ultimately released. If the fertilizer company could buy carbon credits from our cattle industry, the farmers and ranchers that are responsible for managing these grassland acres, then we could offset what their carbon footprint would be, because ultimately we need fertilizer, because fertilizer is what grows crops, that feeds people and feeds billions of people. So, you know, we have to weigh the risks and the benefits and the consequences of different types of business models. But if we can actually create a tangible dollars and cents, a value system for the capture that we store, and then offer that to other industry that would like to move to Alberta, that would put us in an incredibly powerful position and make us very appealing, renewing our Alberta advantage.
I'd like to add a little bit to that. Sustainability, I believe, in the future is going to help us with our trade. There's going to be, you know, there's going to be markets that if you have some sort of a certified sustainable product, you won't be able to trade in those markets, which is a value add all by itself in my mind. Just sustainability itself is a value add.
Mm-hmm. And I think that we've been very fortunate in the beef industry to see leadership from the supply chain, and being a part of the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, and wanting to put that logo on product and collect the data and make sure that we are able to deliver on a sustainable product. And I think that collaboration has been pretty amazing to me. And so when I look at that value add and having you know, the packers be on side with making sure those that they're working to get their customers to have that logo and to be part of the sustainable chain is important. I see opportunities for us to do a more value add in our province and in our country. And you know, there's some examples, some various plants and that you know, are looking at coming online and are needing some additional investment, whether that be for example, the prosciutto plant, or there might be some other areas in agriculture that are like ready-made lettuce. There's a ready-made lettuce plant, and I see that there's some area to have additional jobs come on the line and some economic benefit for us to be able to export the end product, or maybe near the end product. But we do so much export, of course, as we mentioned earlier. Alexis mentioned 40%, and that's pretty amazing. I think that we need to sit back and look at that and really appreciate the companies who are here, who have invested in our industry with us to export our product. So I'm very grateful to them, and I'm hoping that we, where we are today, as we're going to rebuild here in Alberta, that there's going to be some additional innovation, and it has to be tied with sustainability, because sustainability is everything. It's the longevity of doing something. It's doing something for the right reason, and I think that we're all about that.
I'm going to ask a question that's come, so it's just about 12 o'clock, but we've got enough questions that we're going to continue about 10 minutes later. So if anyone's checking out, you will be able to see the continuing portion of the questions on the webinar, and we're just going to keep going for about 10 more minutes. I have one question that came in, which actually just ties really nicely into the last discussion, so I'm going to ask that question. It's, how are beef production companies measuring sustainability? And I don't know if they're just talking about the packer or if they're talking about larger, but I'm kind of seeing this question as an open-ended question that, where we could talk about what some of the companies involved with beef are doing. So the question is, how are beef production companies measuring sustainability?
I would, I'm going to take it from the point that a beef production company is a ranch or a farm. And Jill referred to that earlier on, our set of indicators developed by the CRSB that are now the verified beef production plus indicators. If you've gone through that process and you're verified as a VBP plus operation, that is measuring your sustainability. Now those indicators will change as the science changes as time comes along. I think that's probably the easiest way of measuring whether we're sustainable or not. If you're following those guidelines, and that's the latest science up to date on how to be sustainable, that's the way it is.
I was just thinking too, Bob, when I saw the question just about, you know, like how McDonald's and Harvey's and like Cargill are now looking at, like that was kind of what it was in my mind when I saw the question too, like just how it's further down the chain, there's more companies measuring sustainability, like McDonald's has a verified, you know, about the McDonald's verified, like that's just what I thought when I saw the question too.
Well,
if they were about further down the chain.
We do have, if you look at McDonald's, for instance, we have through the VBP plus program, if Nicole as a primary producer is registered there and myself as a feedlot operator is registered, and if the cattle go through a processing plant that's VBP plus registered, then there is actually a payment from retail back down through that chain. If the animal is traced all the way through, there's a payment comes back down. So I believe that's one way of measuring the sustainability from the retailer's point of view. It's got to be tracked and verified, which we do have. That was a pilot project. It's now an actual program. So Jill, Nicole.
Yeah, when we talked about measurement many years ago and kind of that base point of where we were at as an entire industry, it was an assessment of the entire food chain, supply chain, sorry. And so if you looked at like the packers, for example, I'm just going to pick out a few things, you know, their water recycling systems, water usage, waste, safety, how they treat their employees, all of those things were all had their own specific set of check marks that they needed to meet to really have a clear assessment of where we landed as an entire supply chain. And so of course for as a beef producer, yes, it was verified beef production plus for myself, for example, but for all of the different pieces, they all have their own set of indicators that they need to adhere to, but also strive towards for us to continuously be more efficient. So that's been the power of all this, is that, you know, if one linkage isn't really pulling its weight, then that has an impact on all of us. So that's why we all need to work together. And I think that we're doing that very well.
From really a local standpoint, I'm not going to address, you know, the big picture and the big packers of the world, but I will speak with a certain level of confidence due to the familiarity that I have with a local abattoir. And when I think about the work that they've done within community and, you know, supporting the community, and a big piece for me was the 4-H program and how they've aligned themselves with the 4-H program, and they've created a scholarship carcass program for the 4-H kids. So because they process an incredible volume of our 4-H steers, they grade the carcass, because ultimately that's the end product is how does this animal hang? What is the quality of the meat that's been produced? And they've offered visits to their site, to their facility, and really broke down every step along the way to educate these kids who have the potential to become our beef producers of the future, but to keep them apprised of the big picture that you know, this is what it looks like undressed. Let's take the skin off. We'll take the show sheen off, and we'll take the fluffy hair away, and let's get right down to the bones of the business and understand what this product is going to look like ultimately for your customer. And he teaches the kids how to grade carcasses, so they have that end game understanding of everything that they're doing along the way. So for me, that's a sustainable measurement in being socially responsible, because educating the future beef producers and keeping their customer in mind with the work that they're doing is really, really important. And just because you have a big, you know, 1,700 pound finished 4-H steer, and you go in, and when they have, you know, a lot of fat content, that's not necessarily a quality product. Instead, we want to aim for quality carcass and give them a tangible grading scale, a report card, if you will, on the job that they've done, and help them learn for the future so that they can make improvements within their own project at that one level. But all of those, everything that they put in place is then transferable into a bigger herd situation. So that would be from a very local perspective, what I would shine a light on.
Yeah. So we are running very short on time. So I'm going to ask all three of you if you'd like to give any closing remarks to our audience. And before we start the closing remarks, I'm going to let the audience thank the audience for joining us today, and thank all three of you for your insight. And audience members, you'll receive a follow-up email that includes a survey and a link to the webinar, and a link to the recording of the webinar. And personally, as the moderator for these 5 sessions, I'd just like to thank you as well for attending. If you've attended all 5 sessions, it's been a real pleasure. But anyway, I'd like to turn the floor over to Bob, Jill, and Nicole for some closing remarks about beef sustainability.
Ladies first, I'll finish this off.
So I would just like to extend my warmest thanks for this opportunity. I hope it was obvious to everyone. I'm very passionate about the beef industry. I'm a farmer. I wear 2 hats, but certainly for me, cows are where it's at. And I would just like to thank everyone who tuned in. And even though sometimes those who challenge us can make us feel like we need to get a little bit defensive, it's actually the fact that there are different thinkers, and there's people that are observing, making observations of the industry and asking the tough questions. And what that does is it puts us in a better position to be better and achieve more and continue on that pathway to excellence. So keep the questions coming. And the most important thing, the biggest recommendation I can give to someone who has questions about farming of any aspect, is to go to the source. Go and talk to the people on the front lines, because we can share our stories with you and hopefully, you know, have a better understanding. So thank you, everyone. I've really enjoyed today.
I'd also like to echo the sentiments of thank you for the audience. Thank you, Alexis, for moderating, and my fellow panelists. I really enjoyed today. The Simpson Center, I'm so excited about the center and the good work that's going to be coming out in the months ahead and the years ahead. I think the recognition of the importance of the beef industry in the economic recovery of our country, and really the ability for agriculture to come together, and the beef industry being a big part of that, I think makes me feel very confident as a producer. That's really our everyday here is doing the very best we can for the land, the cattle, and for our people, ourselves, our community. And I just see so much opportunity. I love Alberta. I love where I live. I want to continue to raise my family here and raise cattle and export our genetics worldwide and service our customers here at home as well. That is, I guess, at the crux of it, kind of my goal. but I really, really want to ensure that the policies that are in place in our province and any red tape that might exist that can hold me back, or you know, some imbalances that we kind of mentioned a little bit earlier today, can be rectified in short order to just make us that much more aggressive in our venture to grow and to do what's right, and to continuously produce a sound, healthy, and tasty product. So thank you so much for having me.
I just like to sum it up. For one thing, it's really a humbling, I'll echo the thank yous that everybody else did too, but it's a really humbling experience to be on a panel with Nicole and Jill. That to me is, well, it's a humbling experience. I'd like to suggest, I'm a science guy. I believe in science, and when you believe in science, you can't just pick and choose what science you believe in. You either believe in it or you don't. It's that simple. When a friend of mine told me once at a GRSB meeting, and she said, "Bob, why are you doing this?" And of course, you give the stock answer that you want to, you know, produce a good thing and blah blah blah. She said, "No, really think about it." And really, I do this to feed my family and friends. If we are allowed to use the science, I'll get to produce a little bit more than my family and friends need. And there's somebody somewhere in the world who's going to be really appreciative of that fact. So that's kind of how I'd like to sum it up. Thanks very much, Derek, for everybody for being here. And thanks, Alexis, for moderating.
Thanks you all for having me, and I hope everyone have a good rest of your day, and thank you for your time.